Hey everyone, so I just want to continue along with Reconstruction, wrap up Reconstruction so we can get into the Gilded Age next class, Gilded Age, Progressive Era, and into World War One. Now, the question, right, whether Reconstruction actually did something miraculous and rebuilt the southern United States after the American Civil War from a slave state to a free state, or did it actually just restore Confederate power, Democratic power into the state houses, governments? Now, we talked about that period with presidential Reconstruction. Under Andrew Johnson, we see decisions to roll back Abraham Lincoln's decision or kind of goal for Reconstruction and come up with a more restoration of Southern power. And that will allow ex-Confederates to come to the White House and ask for forgiveness, a loyalty oath to the Union, and then their power was restored. And so we see the goal of land redistribution fail right after Lincoln's assassination. When Congress comes back into session, right, we see Johnson and Congress going head to head. And the Congress would put forward the Civil Rights Bill of 1866, the first attempt to give concrete meaning to the 13th Amendment, which was under Lincoln, that abolished slavery. Johnson vetoed both bills, but these bills would actually pass over vetoes of Johnson. He argued that the bills centralized power and deprived states of autonomy, right? The state, you know, if we have birthright citizenship in the 13th Amendment, right? If you're born here, you're a citizen. And if you're born here and you're a citizen, then you then have the right to vote. Now, what states' autonomy is, should states have the desire and the power to decide who and who cannot, who can vote and who cannot vote. And so we're seeing the federal government override state power and saying the federal government is going to be the guarantor of citizens and their voting. So we're seeing a centralization of power away from states and into the federal government. And I, for one, think that this is not centralizing power. The states are not living up to the protection of civil liberties and civil rights of its citizens. And so if the states can't do it, then somebody else has to do it. And the federal government figures we're going to have to be that agent in the South. Now, Johnson would veto. He would be against this bill. Congress now embarked on its own plan of Reconstruction. The 14th Amendment, which would then pass, ratification of the 14th, placed into the Constitution the principle of citizenship for all persons born in the United States and empower the federal government to protect all the rights of citizens. So the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment gives birthright, citizenship, and vote, and eventually voting, right? If you're born here, you're a citizen. It prohibited the states from denying people equal protection under the law. Born here, you get the protection of the Constitution. Meaning, right, now, if we had the Dred Scott case, Dred Scott can use these amendments and the first 10 Bill of Rights, because now in the eyes of the federal government, he is not viewed as a piece of property. He is viewed as a human being who has all the protections. And it is broad language. The broad language of the 14th Amendment opened up for future Congresses and the federal government to breathe meaning into the guarantee of legal equality. Meaning the next moment we come into, right, after Reconstruction, we kind of go into the Gilded Age. Gilded Age, we had a lot of immigrants. And one of the reasons why immigrants are coming here, yes, there's a lot of jobs, but once you're born here, you're a citizen. So people want their people from Europe, Eastern Europe, Italy, Sicily, North Africa, they're going to want to come to America and have their children born here. And if they're born here, they're citizens entitled to all the rights and privileges of the 14th Amendment. So it does repeal the 3/5 compromise. It does not guarantee the right to vote for African Americans. In a compromise, if a state denied the vote to any group of men, the state's representation in Congress would be reduced. Did not apply to barring women from voting. So women are still left out of the conversation. And a lot of radicals would actually tell women's groups, it's not your turn. It's not your time. 13th Amendment of 1865 effectively gutted the 3/5 compromise by outlawing the enslavement of African American people, also got rid of the fugitive slave clause. But when the 14th Amendment was ratified in 68, it officially repealed the 3/5 compromise, because if the state views them as all citizens, you can't, that's now null and void. Now, it does kind of potentially increase the number of Southern representatives in the South, because the population is not going to be counted of African Americans, not going to be counted as 3/5. It's going to be counted as each single person, but they are voting Republican. So it's not 3/5 of a population that will be counted towards state's population, and then white Democrats are going to take those seats in Congress. The South is scared because now you have those people they're going to be eventually given the right to vote, and they're probably going to vote anti-democratic party, so they're going to probably put more power into the North. So we have a greater population kind of increase in the South, but potential for more Northern power at the federal level, and we will see that in the post-Reconstruction era. Now, not a single Democratic congressman would vote for this act. We then get to the Reconstruction Act of 1867, where we do see the Congress of the United States divide the South into 5 military districts and call for the creation of new state governments with freedmen given the right to vote. Thus began the period of radical Reconstruction, which lasted until 1877. And it's influenced by the ideas of equality, overall disgust over Johnson's policies, and determination to keep Confederates from offices of power. Now, one congressman, in a very pragmatic sort of way, wrote, "I live among men and not among angels." And by writing equality before the law, regardless of race, into the Constitution, the amendment made the most important change to the Constitution since the Bill of Rights. This will be a map of the southern districts, and we'll see the military in charge of those districts. Now, we start to see the road to the impeachment of Johnson. Congress wants to get rid of Johnson. He is not popular. We know that Edwin Stanton and Johnson are not friends. They are butting heads. Congress will supersede the president's power for veto, right? The president has the power to ask for anybody's resignation in his cabinet. That is one of the executive powers that he has. If he doesn't want a new Secretary of Education or Transportation or Housing today, I mean, Biden has the right to just ask for somebody's letter of resignation. Now, what they're going to do in trying putting Johnson in a corner is put in the Tenure of Office Act, which barred the president from removing certain office holders, including members of the cabinet, without the Senate's consent. And a rift between Congress and Johnson deepened as Congress took power away from the president. Now, Johnson would then remove Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and the Congress knew he wanted to do this, so they kind of just beat him to the punch and said, "Oh, if you remove Stanton, we can bring articles of impeachment." Johnson will remove Stanton, who is an ally of the radicals who are calling shots on Reconstruction. Johnson suspends Stanton in 67, then fires him in February 68. Stanton refuses to leave his office and claims his job protection under the Tenure of Office Act, locks himself in the War Department until the Senate voted against the president's removal. We then get to the impeachment trial in February of 1868. The House responded with articles of impeachment. The first impeachment of a sitting president. The first assassination is followed by the first impeachment. So politically, America seems to be falling apart. He'll be tried for high crimes and misdemeanors and get off by 1 vote. I have to remember, at this time, there is no vice president. No vice president. Power would then go to Benjamin F. Ward, second in line in the Senate, and moderates did not like Senator Wade. So final vote 35-19, one vote short of a 2/3 majority. And the next day, Ulysses S. Grant is nominated by the Republican Party. Grant will rise to the Republican Party and returns to the scene as someone who's never served as a political figure. Was the general who won the American Civil War, but really he is the most famous man in America after Lincoln's assassination, and we're kind of teetering. It also strikes a little bit of fear into the South because he did defeat the Confederates, and now he is their president. So Grant is nominated by the Republican Party. Grant wins by a small majority of 300,000 votes. The Republicans find their mandate very uncomfortably slim. Congress acted fast to pass the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment would be the voting rights. Congress, Article 1, the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So you cannot deny by race, color, mixed race people, and previous servitude, right? So let's say somebody was born into the institution of slavery after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. That person now is considered a citizen, entitled to all the protections of the Constitution, and a man that can vote. Women still do not have the right to vote, so this really does apply only to men. So former enslaved men are now citizens, protection of the law, and have the right to vote. Congress shall have the powers to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Now, what does appropriate legislation mean? It's vague for the sense of being able to give more power. This is the last of the Reconstruction amendments, from the auction block to the ballot box. Democrats, unsurprisingly, opposed it, but it was ratified in 1870. The 15th Amendment opened the door to suffrage restrictions not based on race. So women are now going to jump on the 14th and 15th Amendment and use that as a springboard to their movement for voting. What the 15th did not restrict. So 15th said servitude, condition of servitude, race, or color. Said nothing about literacy tests, poll taxes, property qualifications, and those are not covered by the 15th Amendment. So the loophole that the South will find is they will give literacy tests to people to vote, right? African Americans who do not know how to read will be given a test, and if they can't pass the test, they're not going to be given the right to vote, or they have to take a quiz on the new state constitutions. A poll tax, meaning, right, you have to pay to vote. And if you're people that are struggling economically and choices between eating or voting, you're probably going to want to eat. And property qualifications, right? We had that moment after Lincoln's, right before Lincoln's assassination, where we were going to divide up land into 40-acre plots and give that ownership to the people who were newly freed as kind of a reparation for previous servitude and crimes against them. And yet we took that away, and then we're going to use it against them years later by saying, oh, you don't own land? Well, you can't vote. Now, this is a constitutional revolution. 2 prior to the war, we have a new nationally empowered national state and ideas of citizens enjoying equality before the law. Before the war, citizenship was linked to race, and it also opened the door to immigrants to come to this country. Now, know that the 13th was under Lincoln, abolished slavery. 14th was under Johnson, citizenship rights, although Johnson did nothing for it, it's just under his administration. 15th under Grant, voting rights. The Reconstruction amendments inspired a huge outburst of political engagement by African Americans. And by 1870, all former Confederate states had been readmitted and were now under Republican control. African American representation was incredibly high in American politics. 2,000 African Americans occupied public offices during Reconstruction, representing a huge power shift in the South. 14 were elected to the House of Representatives. 2 served as senators from Mississippi, the first being Hiram Revels, and the second being a Blanche K. Bruce, elected in 1875, will serve a term from Mississippi. Those are the first 2. We do not get the third until 1975. We do see the rights of women. Women encounter the limits of Reconstruction amendments on equality. The destruction of slavery will lead to Susan B. Anthony and other women's leaders to start the suffrage movement. Women began advocating for liberalizing divorce laws and control over one's body. And when we start to see women voting opening up for women, we see it really coming from the West, the Western territories, underpopulated when it comes to women. Wyoming in 1869 will give women the right to vote, to kind of attract women to come out there and live there. And one of the things we can look at that is just the absurdity that, right, we could have given women the right to vote all the way back in the U.S. constitutional days, right? So there was massive oppression in terms of citizenship rights and voting rights for women. Talk of women's suffrage found little support, especially coming out of the Civil War, right? The radicals are like, we got so much on our plate right now. They did not supporting it, as I mentioned before, saying it is not your hour. Stanton and Susan B. Anthony opposed the 15th Amendment, Elizabeth Stanton, because it did nothing to enfranchise women. They had the opportunity to add a couple of words, right? Or, gender, just one word, gender to the 15th Amendment, one word, and they chose not to. Grant's presidency, for a large sense, is viewed as a failure, but he does fight the KKK. He will use the military to come after the KKK who are harassing and killing people in the South. He will use the Enforcement Act, outlaws terrorist organization, and allows the president to use the army against them. But we do see the North's commitment to Reconstruction starting to wave. The North is starting to industrialize. We're starting to see a wave of immigrants coming in. We're seeing new factory jobs opening up. We're seeing the West really come into its own with a new identity. And we want to see the North kind of move on from the Civil War. So around 1870, our commitment to the South decreases. Radicals are losing power in the Republican Party. There is a lot of corruption in Grant's administration, and the radical Republicans are kind of turned off by that. Specifically, the big one being the whiskey ring corrupt government officials and whiskey makers were stealing millions of dollars in a national tax evasion scam. We do look at the election of 1877 as the official end of Reconstruction. We'll see Samuel J. Tilden of New York run against Rutherford B. Hayes. A very close, tight election that would actually go, there'll be over some specific states in the South. Both party claims to win South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana, kind of similar to Gore v. Bush in 2000. And we see for the Republicans to maintain the executive office of the government, Congress would appoint a 15-member electoral commission, 8 Republicans, 7 Democrats, right? The Hayes is going to win by 1 vote in this kind of electoral commission because the Republicans don't, they have 1 more vote. Behind the scenes, Hayes agrees Democrats would control the South. Democrats would not dispute in return Hayes's right to office. So Hayes will take office, the Democrats will take control of the southern states, and Hayes would order federal troops to start guarding state houses. Now, he doesn't order the federal troops back to the north, he really just orders them back to their local bases. And so we kind of look at it as the end of Reconstruction. So was Reconstruction a success or failure? Now, if we look at the failures, 1, land was not redistributed, and we see sharecropping come back. We see pardons to ex-Confederates like Nathan Bedford Forrest, Robert E. Lee, and Stephen Alexander Stevens, the vice president of the Confederacy. We see the institution of black codes restricting African American freedom in labor, in courts, in contracts, which eventually leads to Jim Crow. We also see the impeachment of a president. This is a failure of Reconstruction, our first impeachment. We also see a failure in Southern infrastructure. They don't get a manufacturing base. They'll be somewhat agrarian, and that will kind of leave them behind economically in the coming century. Then we do look at successes. Slavery does end, doesn't come back. It doesn't come back as an institution. We look at it does end after 1865 with Abraham Lincoln. We did not have another war, right? We see a lot of times war comes in twos. Revolution 1812, World War I, World War II with the same combatants. We see Iraq, Desert Storm, Iraq War. We don't see a second civil war, and a lot of nations do go into sometimes either successive civil war, or they don't really ever really recover from it, as in the case of North Korea versus South Korea, which is still technically in a civil war. They're just on a break at the moment. We do see the nation come back together, and war does not break out again. Now, it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be a bumpy road. Nothing's perfect, but we don't see that happen. We do see the North and South reunited. We have the Reconstruction Amendments. We have the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. Federally, the federal government is using its authority to protect citizens, give them the right to vote, and end the institution of slavery. We see the Freedmen's Bureau, government's obligation to its citizens increases. We bury the dead from the Civil War. We have an institution that will be government funded to help the transition from slavery to freedom. We see African American political representation increase in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. Men born into the institution of slavery who become senators. It's a miracle. It's amazing. Southern states have new constitutions that does not allow for slavery. And that will bring us to the Gilded Age. Gilded Age is where our focus will begin tomorrow, where industrialization, manufacturing, and immigration will be the center of that. I will see you all tomorrow. Take a look at this when you get a chance, and have a great night.